They had been told that the Americans were ruthless, ready to inflict hunger, pain, and humiliation. Yet, when the Japanese soldiers arrived at Camp McCoy in the freezing winter of 1944, they were surprised. The enemy did not break them with violence, but with hamburgers and Coca-Cola. They had expected the end. Instead, they found survival. The train came to a metallic thud, and the doors swung open onto the snow sparkling under a pale sun. Dozens of men slowly disembarked, squinting to shield their eyes from the light, their uniforms tattered and patched with makeshift cloth. Hunger was evident: hollow faces, lost gazes, chapped lips. Weeks of minimal rations and exhausting marches had left indelible marks on their bodies. From the first day in the Imperial Army, they had learned a strict rule: to be captured was dishonor, a fate worse than death. They had feared torture, deprivation, and humiliation, preparing to surrender without a fight. But what lay before them was unlike any nightmare. The camp was surrounded by wooden barracks and guard towers, enclosed by barbed wire. A few sentries patrolled the perimeter, but the atmosphere was orderly, almost calm. Trucks moved along the snowy roads, and from the kitchens came the aroma of hearty food, far from the watery soups they were used to. Some men exchanged suspicious glances, others lowered their eyes, reluctant to show curiosity. The guards' orders were swift and firm, yet not threatening. Unable to understand the words, they sensed the tone, stern, but controlled. Interpreters translated the instructions: line up, advance, do not break formation. The Red Cross observed from a distance, noting every detail. For the prisoners, it was incredible. They had always believed America to be cruel and lawless, yet here rules and protocol were applied with rigor. The intake process was cold but humane: delousing, burning infested uniforms, thorough medical checks. A soldier with a bandaged arm expected indifference, yet a doctor examined him carefully, treating the wound. He remained still, unable to reconcile this act of care with the image of merciless enemies that had been ingrained in him. Incredulous whispers among fellow prisoners: "Why would they treat us like this? There must be a trick." Fear was still alive, every step heavy with tension. And yet, step by step, something surprising emerged: a discipline that respected rules and, for the first time, an unexpected humanity. After registration, the prisoners were led to the barracks. The snow creaked beneath their boots, the cold seeping through their thin clothing. The buildings were basic, heated by stoves, with neatly arranged bunks and wool blankets. It was not freedom, it was not home, but it offered shelter. Some men sat slowly on the beds, running their hands over them as if afraid that the comfort might vanish at the slightest touch. Outside, the barbed wire coiled in spirals, signaling that freedom was far away and that captivity was real. But inside the camp, the soldiers noticed details that eluded their deepest fears. The camp functioned like a precise gear, orderly and methodical, yet it bore no resemblance to a hellish prison. The contrast unsettled them. All their lives, they had been taught that being captured meant losing all dignity, becoming degraded creatures in the eyes of the enemy. Here, however, the first images told a different story: a guard supporting a sick man, a doctor carefully bandaging a wound, a Red Cross representative ensuring everyone received the correct rations. It was not safety, it was not freedom, but it was an unexpected respect. Suspicion beat in their chests like a second heart. And yet, when night fell and they lay on the cots under wool blankets, an unexpected thought began to creep in. Perhaps the true shock was not captivity, but the way it appeared, completely different from the nightmare they had feared. For men prepared for cruelty and deprivation, the first day at Camp McCoy marked the beginning of something incomprehensible. But the real astonishment would not come from the rules or the barracks. It would come in the mess hall, carried by the smell of meat and the hiss of soda bottles, promises of a world they had almost forgotten. The following morning, they were awakened not by shouts or blows, but by the sound of a bugle. The call surprised many. It was not the power of the sound that impressed them, but its familiarity. In Japan, they had heard it in their training camps, and for a moment some forgot where they were. Then reality returned with the clatter of boots and English voices ordering formation, roll call, and the march to the mess hall. Fear pressed down, compressed in their chests like a stone. Many expected insufficient rations or inadequate food, even something unfit for animals. Hunger had been their constant companion. In the Pacific, meals had been limited to bowls of watery rice, sometimes barley, a few pickled vegetables. Meat and sugar were distant legends. Before food, however, came procedures. The prisoners were led into a large hall where a Red Cross representative, through an interpreter, explained their rights under the Geneva Convention. They would be fed and housed, allowed to write letters home, work only under specific conditions, and not be mistreated. Neutral officials would regularly oversee these provisions. The words fell like an impossible surprise. Some lowered their eyes, confused and incredulous. Others whispered among themselves, doubting the sincerity of what they heard. One soldier murmured to a companion, "Rights, but we're their prisoners. Why should they care?" The interpreter paused, letting the murmurs die down. "These are not promises," he explained. "They are rules. They bind you in them." The words hung in the air, heavy with a weight the prisoners struggled to grasp. This was followed by a medical inspection, more thorough than the day before. A doctor felt their thin wrists, examined teeth and blood pressure, and weighed the men. Many were underweight. Malnutrition was evident, yet no one mocked them. A corporal even handed out small vitamin tablets, leaving the prisoners bewildered at such unexpected care. Medicine? For the enemy? The thought almost seemed an insult in its kindness. In the afternoon, clean and simple clothing arrived, practical uniforms with the letters PW clearly visible. The garments fit better than their threadbare rags, barely patched. Some men put them on hesitantly, as if every scene marked another surrender of their identity. Others let themselves be wrapped in the warmth of the fabric, trembling less as the icy Wisconsin wind swept between the barracks. The guards were another surprise. Armed and alert, yes, but not hostile. No one spat, no one struck those who moved slowly. Order was maintained without cruelty. When an older prisoner slipped on the ice, a guard helped him up by the arm. No sneer, no kick, just a quick nod before moving on. The men remained confused. That night, in the barracks, conversations were low and heavy with disbelief. "Can you believe it?" one whispered, staring at the ceiling beams. "They talk about rules as if it's a contract. Don't they hate us?" A companion replied, "They must be tricking us. To make us talk, to test us." Yet the smell from the kitchens returned to fill the air. Thick, intense, greasy, far from the thin, sour soups they knew from the islands. Something full, hearty. Their stomachs growled, betraying them involuntarily. To the Americans, it seemed, food was routine, a meal on Tuesday, another on Thursday. Nothing more. But for those who had marched through jungles and beaches, gnawed roots in caves, faced surrender with hunger as their only companion, that smell was almost unbearable. Some pressed their faces into blankets to ignore it, others whispered doubts, fearing that the kindness would vanish as quickly as it had appeared. The next day, the lines formed again. Trays were filled, and the routine resumed: rules, inspections, procedures. But between their expectations and reality, a strangely new truth began to take hold. America, even in war, believed in order. And order was nothing compared to what awaited them in the mess hall, where hunger and memory would collide with a hamburger and a glass bottle they had never seen before. The line moved slowly. Boots scraped the floor, and from the backs of the counters rose a steam heavy with fragrance, rich, smoky, almost unreal to Japanese noses. Real meat, unlike the dried fish or small scraps they remembered from home. Dense, substantial, almost a luxury. The prisoners clutched their trays like shields, expecting ridicule. But there was no trick. An American cook, sleeves rolled up, placed a hamburger on a bun, added French fries on the side, and popped open a glass bottle of Coca-Cola, the red label incomprehensible but inviting. The soldier's hand shook as he moved forward slowly, staring at the tray as if it were a trap. Behind him, the others leaned forward to see. Whispers ran through the line. "Meat, they're giving us meat." With each tray filled, disbelief grew. Soft bread, golden fries, the bottle fizzing at the touch, a small daily miracle that defied every fear and suspicion. In a corner of the mess hall, the prisoners sat along long wooden tables, eyeing the food cautiously, like explorers in unknown and dangerous territory. Someone brought the bottle to his lips, hesitating. The sweetness hit first, followed by the tingling fizz in the throat. Some coughed in surprise, others widened their eyes, unable to believe what they were tasting. One man burst out laughing, an uncontrollable sound that surprisingly echoed through the hall. Next to him, a companion covered his mouth, lowering his head as his shoulders shook, suspended between laughter and tears. A thin soldier, ribs visible even beneath his new uniform, lifted the hamburger with both hands as if afraid it might fall apart. He sniffed it, then bit into it. The fat dripped onto his chin. They sat still, chewing slowly, as if every bite might vanish at the slightest movement. Then they lowered their gaze, hiding tears no one dared admit. A companion gave him a gentle tap. "You okay?" he asked. "I had forgotten the taste of fat," the man murmured. At another table, two prisoners spoke in low voices. "They want to make us weak," said one. "Fatten us up to make us forget our cause." "Or," the other replied slowly, "maybe it's just how they eat every day." That idea was harder to digest than the meal itself. The mess hall filled with muted sounds, chewing, restrained laughter, barely hidden sobs. For men who had known Guadalcanal, Saipan, and the collapsed supply lines of their home island, this meal was more than nourishment, it was a challenge to their very beliefs. A prisoner whispered to his companion that the sweetness of the Coca-Cola seemed like an impossible dream, too kind to exist in wartime. The Americans serving the food, however, noticed nothing extraordinary. To them, it was routine: hamburgers and fries, a bottle of soda, nothing more. Feeding them was simply part of the day. For the prisoners, though, it was like being catapulted into another reality. What stunned them was not only the abundance, but the normalcy: no celebration, no ridicule, no theatrics. Just a Tuesday dinner. That contrast struck deeper than any insult. Men who had fought fiercely and had grown up with the idea of a cruel enemy now found themselves eating better than they had even as free soldiers of the Empire. The shame was acute, but the relief even more so. When the trays were emptied and the bottles left empty on the tables, the prisoners leaned back in silence. Some joined their hands in prayer, others stared at the walls, trying to absorb what they had just experienced. The guards called them to order, escorting them back to the barracks. Outside, in line, still incredulous, the soldiers whispered to one another. Lying on their cots that night, the memory of the hamburger and Coca-Cola stayed with them, not just as food, but as tangible proof: the enemy could be human, even generous. Yet the reality of captivity remained unchanged. Each morning, the prisoners awoke to roll call, boots crunching in the frost, rifles pointed from the guard towers. The barbed wire continued to cut across the horizon, a constant warning: this life, however different from their expectations, was still a prison. Inside the barbed wire, routine governed every moment. After breakfast, prisoners were divided into groups. Some shoveled snow along the roads, others chopped wood, and still others helped on nearby farms under the watchful eyes of the guards. The work was continuous, but not brutal. Surprisingly, many men were not pushed to exhaustion. On the contrary, they received small camp coupons, redeemable in the mess hall for hygiene items, stationery, sweets, or even cigarettes. One afternoon, a Japanese soldier opened a chocolate bar with trembling hands, bought with his coupons. "In Japan," he whispered to his companion, "this is medicine. Here they give it like it's nothing." His friend shook his head, incredulous. The mess hall was another small shock. Prisoners watched the Americans enter and exit, talk and laugh among themselves, buy Coca-Cola or chewing gum with ease. The casualness was almost unbearable. While war raged elsewhere, Wisconsin seemed like a world apart. Yet the monotony of camp began to make itself felt. There were no battles, no advances, no comrades to bury. Only a fixed routine: wake up, work, meals, sleep. Minds, once consumed by mere survival, began to wander, and with wandering came nostalgia. Letters became lifelines. Each prisoner could write 2 letters and 4 postcards a month, heavily censored, but precious. They bent over tables, tracing words with hard pencils, trying to capture home, family, their lives. "I am alive," was often all they could say. Some received replies, thin envelopes with familiar kanji, other times, no response, and the silence grew heavy week after week. In the evenings, English lessons were offered. Few participated actively, repeating slowly words like bread, table, window. Others mocked, convinced that learning the enemy's language was useless. Even the skeptics, however, listened from their cots, attentive to the unusual rhythm of the words. There were also moments of unexpected human contact. Once, a guard asked a prisoner, "Do you miss rice?" Translated by the interpreter, the soldier laughed bitterly. "Rice is a memory." The guard fell silent, perhaps understanding the weight of those words. Not all interactions were kind. Some guards were cold, speaking only to give orders. In the barracks, heated arguments among prisoners were frequent. Some clung to the idea of Japan's victory, others, worn down by reality, whispered that defeat was inevitable. One night, two men argued so loudly that a guard intervened. "You dishonor our homeland by speaking of defeat," shouted one. "And you dishonor reason by denying what you see," retorted the other. The guards silenced them, but the tension remained. Even here, in the heart of America, the war lived in their minds. Yet life in the camp also generated small human routines. Some carved wooden toys during their free time, others invented makeshift games or sat telling stories of home. The smell of the mess hall never left them, but it was constant, predictable. 3 meals a day, a security unknown in the jungle trenches or on the devastated islands. In the barracks, at night, silence quickly fell after the lights went out. Someone whispered, "What will your family eat tonight?" No answer came, only sighs and the rustle of blankets. Life at Camp McCoy was not freedom. But it was not cruelty either. It was a prison with rules, ordinariness, and small moments of humanity that confused, tested, and somehow survived within each prisoner. It was a limbo, an in-between space where survival was guaranteed, yet the meaning of life seemed to slip away. And yet, the longer they remained inside the barbed wire, the more strange, unexpected details emerged. Behind the strict schedules and guarded fences, fragments of connection appeared between prisoners and guards, moments that could not be explained by rules or routine. For weeks, the camp ran like clockwork. The guards gave orders, the prisoners obeyed, and meals arrived on time. The rhythm was predictable, even monotonous. But within those mechanisms, small cracks let humanity filter through. Moments either side could have predicted at the start of the war. Often they began with the simplest thing, language. Few Japanese spoke English, and most Americans did not know a word of Japanese. Commands passed through interpreters or gestures. Yet necessity pushed improvisation. A guard pointed to a shovel and ordered, "Work." A prisoner, trying to repeat the sound, mumbled, "Waku." Soon the others imitated him, quietly laughing at their clumsy pronunciations. During an evening English lesson, an instructor wrote the word family on the board and asked for a volunteer to pronounce it aloud. A prisoner stood, hesitated, then said, "Family." The class erupted in laughter, not mockingly, but genuinely. Even the teacher smiled. Even the prisoner relaxed, his face softening after weeks of tension. For a moment, the label of enemy gave way to men trying to bridge an invisible chasm. Food continued to build bridges. On rare occasions, the guards offered prisoners cigarettes or chewing gum while they worked. The gum puzzled many, some chewed it, then swallowed it out of fear or ignorance. The Americans burst out laughing, shaking their heads and trying to explain. Soon, that small piece of gum became a symbol of exchange. A guard offered, a prisoner accepted with a bow. But there were moments of tension. On a farm outside the camp, a farmer watched a group of prisoners at work, the pain of losses in the Pacific still visible in his eyes. When a man bent down to pick up a tool, the farmer spat near his feet. The escorting guard noticed the act, did not intervene immediately, but the tension remained palpable in the cold air. "I should have let them starve," the farmer muttered. On the way back, The prisoners spoke among themselves. "Not all Americans follow the rules," one said. "Of course not. They are men like us. Some will hate, others won't," replied a companion. Inside the barbed wire, unexpected friendships sometimes formed. A young guard, Miller, barely in his 20s, with a soft Illinois accent, would linger near the barracks after his shift, showing the prisoners photographs of his family. They did not understand the words, but they understood the faces: mother, father, 2 little sisters. The prisoners traced the shapes of their own villages, their wives, and their distant homes on the ground. It was not dialogue in words, but dialogue through images. One evening Miller slowly said, "Mother, father." A prisoner nodded, touching his chest. "Ha ha, shishi amudo." Moments later, a guard ordered Miller to move along, but the seed had been planted. Yet culture and suspicion ran deep. Loyalty to the emperor was not erased by hamburgers, Coca-Cola, or English lessons. Some prisoners warned their companions: every foreign word, every laugh with a guard, risked eroding their honor. In the dim light of the barracks, debates flared. Did survival justify adaptation, or did adapting mean betraying who they truly were? One prisoner wrote in his diary, "They told us the Americans were cruel, yet they share gum and tend to our wounds. What is the lie? What is the truth?" The contradictions tore at him from within. For some, the guards' kindness seemed almost humiliating, a reminder that they, as prisoners, were living better than their families could under the bombings. For others, the same gestures were unsettling, yet revealed an undeniable fact: the enemy was not faceless. One snowy night, as the camp lights flickered and shadows danced on the barracks, a prisoner whispered to his bunkmate, "If we survive, what will we tell our children? That the enemy gave us blankets, food, smiles?" His companion remained silent, then replied in a low voice, "We will tell the truth, even if it shames us." The truth, however, was complex. As the war dragged toward its conclusion, contradictions grew, forcing the men to question what loyalty and honor really meant. By the winter of 1945, the routine at Camp McCoy was firmly established. Hunger no longer hollowed out their faces as deeply. Work, though still tiring, no longer broke their bodies. Some even dared to ask the guards how to write words in English while composing letters home, trying to maintain a thread connecting them to the distant world. On the surface, life seemed manageable. But beneath that surface, an inner conflict churned. How could they reconcile humane treatment with the hatred and loyalty still burning in their hearts? Every night, heated arguments broke out in the barracks. Some insisted that all kindness was a trick, designed to weaken them before repatriation. One night, a man stood, voice hard. "Do not be deceived. Our emperor demands strength, not comfort. Every hamburger we eat is a betrayal." Others, exhausted by suffering, countered, "We are alive. And if survival is betrayal, what did starving to death at Saipan achieve?" Silence. Silence and shame. Letters from home sharpened the contradictions. When a prisoner received news of his family in Osaka, forced to subsist on scraps and boiled herbs, he held the sheet trembling, while the smell of roast beef from the mess hall filled his nose. "I eat like a soldier," he whispered, "while my children starve." It was not only the food. Even warmth and comfort became symbols of guilt. Heated barracks, wool blankets, daily security, they reminded them of what their families lacked. Some clung still to propaganda, repeating the words like prayers: America was decadent, ready to collapse. Yet all around them, evidence contradicted that narrative: bottles of Coca-Cola, cigarettes available to prisoners and soldiers, fertile fields, barns full of livestock. A guard, hearing a prisoner comment on the lush fields, said in a calm tone, "This is just Wisconsin, you should see Illinois." The prisoner lowered his gaze, burned by envy and shame. Contradictions seeped in silently, breaking some men from within, more than the pangs of hunger or the Wisconsin cold. One evening, amid the crackle of stoves and the silence of the barracks, a prisoner murmured in a broken voice, "I always believed Japan was the center of the world, but now it seems like just a small island." His companions quietly scolded him, warning him never to speak such thoughts aloud. But the words had already been spoken, and thoughts cannot be erased. Religion added another layer of reflection and comfort. Some men gathered in silent circles, praying to their ancestors, clinging to tradition and the memory of their villages. Others observed American chaplains leading services for soldiers, curiosity growing. Some participated, not out of faith, but to sit in the warmth of the chapel, hear incomprehensible songs, and feel part of something larger. Different gods, different rituals, but the same human need for hope. Contradictions were strongest during Red Cross inspections. Officials asked prisoners if they were being treated properly. Many answered yes because it was true. But then, back in the barracks, shame overwhelmed them. We acknowledge that our enemy treats us fairly, while our own homeland cannot protect us. What have we become? No one had an answer. One afternoon, while a work crew cleared snow from a road, a group of American children approached timidly. A little girl extended a chocolate bar through the barbed wire to a prisoner. He froze, paralyzed. He had faced bombs, hunger, and bullets. But that simple, innocent gesture shook him more than any attack. Slowly he picked up the candy, bowed deeply, and said, in uncertain English, "Thank you." The girl smiled and returned to play with her companions. That night, he confessed to his bunkmates, "A child of the enemy gave me food with a smile. How can I hate her?" Moments like this left scars of confusion. They did not erase loyalty to the emperor, they did not end the war within them, but they blurred the lines between friend and foe. As 1945 progressed, news of the war outside the camp arrived slowly. Rumors of bombings in Tokyo, losses in the Philippines, trickled through the guards and Red Cross officials. Each new piece of news deepened the contradiction. Inside the barbed wire there was regular food, shelter, humanity. Outside, Japan was burning. The looming question was simple and terrifying. What would happen when the gates opened and they returned to a homeland in ruins? By the summer of 1945, the reality outside the camp was unrecognizable. Whispers became newspaper headlines glimpsed through the guards. The Allies advanced in Europe, and Japanese cities lay in devastation from bombing raids. When Hiroshima and Nagasaki were struck, the horror seeped into every account, even if few understood what an atomic bomb truly was. Then the inevitable arrived. Japan had surrendered. The announcement fell over the camp like an unbearable weight. Some prisoners remained frozen, staring at the floor. Others wept silently, shoulders trembling under thin blankets. For years, they had believed the nation could never fall and that death was preferable to defeat. Now, defeat reached them behind the barbed wire, with no way to fight back. The guards did not celebrate. They continued with meals, roll call, and inspections. For the prisoners, the normalcy of the camp had become unbearable. "They treat us all the same," one whispered. "Whether we are warriors or defeated, do they not see our shame?" But the camp was already preparing for repatriation. The Red Cross organized lists, routes, and schedules. Clean uniforms, medical checkups, briefings for the journey home. They would return across the Pacific, not as victorious soldiers, but as survivors of a lost war. The departure was not a triumph, it was only the end of a long wait. On the morning of departure, the prisoners emerged from the barracks, carrying small bundles with their most precious possessions, carved wooden trinkets, carefully folded letters from home, stained with tears and sweat. As they passed through the gates for the last time, many looked back at Camp McCoy. It was not affection that moved them, but confusion. The place they had expected cruelty had offered food, blankets, and acts of kindness they had never anticipated. The journey home was long and arduous. On the ship, men crowded together, exchanging questioning glances, wondering what awaited them in Japan. Bombed cities, scattered families, hunger harsher than anything they had known before capture. Guilt gripped them, but they could not erase the memory of that first meal at Camp McCoy. One soldier wrote in his notebook, "I thought my enemy would break me with violence. Instead, he broke me with food. I cannot forget the taste of bread, meat, sweetness." That memory would follow them like a shadow. When they finally set foot on Japanese soil, reality overwhelmed them. Bombed out cities, smoldering ruins, houses reduced to skeletons of wood. Families welcomed them with tears and relief, but also with pain and resentment. Some had barely survived on roots and bark, others were gone. Some prisoners faced accusations of cowardice or dishonor, yet within themselves they carried stories few wanted to hear, of hamburgers and Coca-Cola, of ordinary gestures that revealed humanity. In the years that followed, some recounted their experiences cautiously, admitting that they had been forced to see the enemy not as monsters, but as men. Others remained silent forever, burying the memories beneath duty and shame. Yet, even in silence, the contradictions persisted. The legacy of Camp McCoy does not lie in battles or victories, but in the moments when food, kindness, and routine collided with fear and loyalty. For those prisoners, captivity revealed an uncomfortable yet undeniable truth: humanity can endure even in the midst of war. Wars end, nations rise and fall, but small choices, a guard showing a photograph, a child offering a sweet, a cook placing a hamburger on the counter, can leave lasting marks. For those soldiers, the taste of Coca-Cola and the meat of a hamburger became symbols of contradiction, survival, and of what even an enemy can give. One prisoner told his son years later, "In America, I learned that kindness is harder to endure than cruelty. You can fight cruelty, you remember kindness. War can take everything, but it cannot erase the power of small acts of humanity." This is the story worth remembering, the choices of men in the darkest hours, revealing who we truly are. If this story moved you, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to bring to light episodes that have shaped history. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and stay with us to explore more glimpses of the past.